The Star Wars saga has been an enormous part of my life since I was 8 years old. The first moment I watched A New Hope, I was hooked, and my life was changed forever, as stereotypical as that sounds. In this video, I aim to rank all 9 Star Wars movies, including the newly released The Last Jedi, in order of favourite. From the outset, I must say that this is not a list that will impress everyone. In fact, I'm not sure if it will impress anyone at all, but this is my personal list. This is not a ranking in order of what I believe to be best to worst. That is a ranking that would be drastically different to this one. This list is one of my favourites, in order of the love I have for each movie and their impact on my life and love for cinema. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is my personal ranking of the Star Wars saga. At number 9, it's Attack of the Clones. Ugh, Attack of the Clones. Look, I dislike this movie so much that it pains me to even spend 2 minutes of my life writing this and reading it out for this video. I don't think there was one moment in time that I ever liked Attack of the Clones, even when I was a kid. George Lucas's screenwriting reached an all-time low with clones. Slow-moving story, awful dialogue, forced attempts at humour, and the coercion of cringe-worthy performances from his lead stars. No, I don't blame bad acting on the actors. I mean, the delightful Natalie Portman is an Academy Award winner, for God's sakes, and Ewan McGregor is just... well, he's just an absolute star. No, I blame the bad acting on a director who wanted to push his space opera just a little too far. I mean, I love George Lucas, I really do. He's given me a life full of happiness and adventure, but this movie was his absolute lowest point. The only saving grace of this movie was seeing Yoda fight with a lightsaber for the first time. I will never ever forget my first time seeing that in a cinema. It was spectacular. Over time though, even that scene just hasn't held up very well. Other than that, this movie is so boring, so painful, that it's not just a chore to watch it, but it's like absolute torture. You know, it's a bit like sand. It's coarse, it's rough, it's irritating. At number 8 is Revenge of the Sith. I loved Revenge of the Sith so much when it first came out. I saw it close to 5 times in the cinemas and had it on repeat for weeks on end after it was released on DVD. Over a decade later, however, Revenge of the Sith just hasn't held up for me. Lucas's awful dialogue and terrible forced humor carry over into this movie more than I ever noticed. In fact, so much so that the entire first half hour of this movie is so cringy, again, it's almost like torture to sit through. The back end of this movie, however, is great, and the final realization of Lucas's vision absolutely prevailed. But despite the many questions answered and many threads tied up that lead into the original trilogy, somehow Revenge of the Sith doesn't feel like Star Wars to me anymore. I don't know if it's the abundance of CGI over practical effects or simply that darned corny dialogue. I just don't enjoy this one as much as I used to. And while I have amazing memories attached to it, I just have very little nostalgia watching it back. In at number 7 is Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Now this is how you do a Star Wars movie. The first Star Wars movie to fully focus on war. Brutal, honest, and a hell of a ride. Rogue One is close to being one of the best Star Wars movies ever made. So why does it land so low on my list? Simply put, I'm just not in love with it as much as I am some of the other movies. While I love the story and I love the characters, I just don't feel a great connection to them as I do with the previous movies. There's some wonderful performances in here, but these are characters you never fully form relationships with. No one you can follow into further adventures with proper arcs. They almost feel two-dimensional. The movie doesn't have the stakes the others do because the conclusion of the story has been known for 40 years. Rogue One was absolutely mind-blowing in cinemas, but I feel that over time, it just hasn't held up incredibly well for rewatchers. It's not one I could watch over and over and over again. The use of practical effects in this movie is incredibly admirable, and it's daring to completely reshape. The last act, soon before release, was bold and brave, but the real triumph of this movie was that scene. Oh boy. That scene. Now that is something I could watch over and over and over and over again. Coming in at number 6, surprisingly, is Return of the Jedi. To me, Return of the Jedi was always the sore thumb of the original trilogy. While I love the film for furthering the adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia, it was never one that got much repeat viewing on my television set. People put Return of the Jedi down to being that one movie from the original trilogy that was a blatant merchandise machine. Cute furry little bears, a plethora of action figure-worthy aliens in a cool palace. And while I do love every bit of it, even as a kid, portions of the movie kind of felt tacky. I always felt that it lacked the heart and originality of Hope and Empire, and it never truly inspired me the way the other installments had. What I have always loved, however, and appreciate even more to this day, is the movie's final act. As far as final acts go, not just for a movie but for a trilogy and a saga, the final act of Jedi is absolute perfection. Good prevails over evil, character and story arcs are well rounded, and loose ends are tied up. The last half an hour of Jedi are exactly how a finale should be done. It's cinema at its greatest, and for that, it lands just above Rogue One on my list, which, if I'm being honest, is probably a better and more rounded story. Jedi is a fun ride, and I do enjoy it, but personally, it's just not a favourite. Hang on a second, what the hell is he doing here? Get out of this movie. That's better. Righto, I'm going to throw a spanner in the works here, and at number 5, I'm going to chuck in The Phantom Menace. I acknowledge that The Phantom Menace isn't a great movie, and if I were to rank the Star Wars movies by quality, it would probably wind up down the bottom somewhere. While in hindsight, Phantom Menace doesn't really feel like a Star Wars movie, when I was a kid, this was Star Wars. I grew up in that generation that were kids during the release of the prequels, and to kids of the era, these movies were amazing. They were mind-blowing and they were eye-opening. Phantom Menace was my first cinematic Star Wars experience and my first experience seeing anything like it in a cinema. Alongside both Star Wars A New Hope and The Wizard of Oz, I put The Phantom Menace down as being one of the movies that shaped my love for movies and visual storytelling. You have to remember that The Phantom Menace came at the dawn of the CGI era, and just how A New Hope changed the face of movies with its groundbreaking visual effects, Phantom Menace laid the groundwork for the next 2 decades of cinema and started a digital revolution. The movie is big, it's bold, and it's bombastic. With gorgeous visual and costume design and breathtaking sequences, The Phantom Menace left me asking, how did they do that? And how can I do that? The movie may not be that great, but the imagination and desire it sparked in me truly is. Coming in at number 4 is The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens was the Star Wars movie I never wanted and never thought we'd ever need. When Disney announced a new Star Wars trilogy, I was kind of annoyed. I was skeptical. I'd always felt that Lucas's saga was perfect and it had closure, but boy was I wrong. Force Awakens turned out to not only be the Star Wars movie we always wanted, but it turned out to be the Star Wars movie that I needed to revitalize my love for the franchise, which had waned since I had grown up after the release of Revenge of the Sith a decade earlier. A perfect Star Wars movie from beginning to end, and at that point, the best Star Wars movie released in my lifetime. With an almost perfect screenplay, a wonderful direction, and a return to practical visual effects, this was Star Wars. Seeing old favourites on the big screen, sharing new adventures along with now favourite new characters, made for such an incredible cinematic experience. Say what you will about The Force Awakens recycling the formula of A New Hope and, well, a million other stories before it, I found this the perfect way to start fresh for a new generation. This was the Star Wars I had been waiting for my whole life. But wait, did I speak too soon? Coming in at number 3 is The Last Jedi. Now this is the Star Wars movie I've wanted my whole life. Daring, bold, and completely unpredictable. Rian Johnson's entry in the Star Wars saga is one of the biggest and bravest entries in the franchise so far. It's a movie that keeps 2 steps ahead of the audience every step of the way, and dares to do things that I didn't expect to see until the end of this current trilogy. Insane action sequences, beautiful and respectful nods and homages to the original movies, and the best cast assembled for a Star Wars movie since the original trilogy. Mark Hamill's moving performance as an aged and bitter Luke Skywalker is a franchise highlight, and Carrie Fisher's emotional send-off is as perfect as it is respectful. The Last Jedi is the greatest Star Wars movie released in my lifetime up until this point, and it will be played regularly in my home once it hits home media. On par with the next movie on my list, this movie did things to me emotionally that I haven't experienced in cinema since I first experienced Star Wars almost 2 decades ago. The Last Jedi took me completely by surprise. It knocked me off my feet, slaughtered me and reassembled me, a changed man. But you know, not in a like a Darth Vader kind of way, like in a good way. In a good way. Coming in at number 2 is The Empire Strikes Back. Oh boy, isn't The Empire Strikes Back just something else? Not only one of the greatest movies ever made, but easily one of the greatest sequels of all time, next to only The Godfather Part 2. But isn't that fitting? The Empire Strikes Back could well be the godfather of all science fiction movies. The movie that proved a sequel could better the original offering and made way to the idea of a cinematic franchise. With The Empire Strikes Back, Lucas boldly aimed to do something that had never really been tried before. Take your main characters, whose chemistry made the first outing, and split them up. Take them on their own journeys and then slam them all back together in the final act. Empire is the perfect middle act of a story, if we count the original trilogy as a self-contained arc. This is the act that not only splits our characters from each other, but splits them from themselves. Luke, our hero, faces the biggest test of all. Is it good or is it evil? The ultimate decision. Empire certainly didn't get as much viewing on my TV as A New Hope, but it got more play than Jedi. In fact, I would often watch Hope and Empire back to back without watching Jedi. They are just two perfect pieces of a puzzle. Well, you know, with exception of this part. Yeesh. And that final confrontation between Luke and Vader is just cinematic genius. Suspense, thrills, and of course, shock horror. It's a movie that has perhaps grown on me over time. The older I become, the more mature I can see the story is, and the more impressive I can see the filmmaking is. The layers slowly peel, revealing a deeper story with each viewing, and only the most perfect of movies can ever do that. Before we get to our number one, here are a couple of honourable mentions. Yeah, no, you're right, these aren't worth mentioning at all. And finally we come to my number one, A New Hope, or as it was known on its original release in 1977, simply Star Wars. I feel that even today that simply Star Wars is the perfect title for this movie. Because, well, this is Star Wars. When I think of Star Wars, I think of A New Hope. I think of the first moments I sat to watch this movie on VHS, and I think about how my mind was irrevocably shattered. My life changed in 1,001 different ways. Not only did the movie introduce me to a gang of unlikely heroes and lifelong friends who I have loved and adored since I was 8 years old, but it changed the path my life took from that moment forward. Star Wars was my introduction to grand storytelling. The moment I fell in love with cinema. The moment I decided I wanted to tell stories. The moment I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker. I adore Star Wars more than any other movie, except perhaps The Wizard of Oz, which had a very similar effect on me, albeit at a younger age. I can't explain the timelessness of this tale. This story is just so relatable. Everyone wishes they were these characters. Everyone wishes they could go on these adventures. The story uses an age-old formula, but does it so wonderfully, so originally, that it makes it the perfect movie. The story behind the story is just as enthralling too. An independent filmmaker shunned by every studio in town, given the green light to make the most lavish independent film of all time by one producer who kind of believed in his vision. His tenacity in having to literally invent techniques and devices to tell his story on the screen. His conquering of the cinematic landscape by pulling the biggest trick the world has ever seen. Taking one small idea that no one believed in and turning it into a worldwide juggernaut. Star Wars is more than just a movie to me. It's the epitome of all that I am and all that I've ever wanted to be. My life has been changed enormously by this 1 2-hour adventure. And I owe so much to it, to Mr. Lucas, and to absolutely everyone who took us on a journey into a galaxy far, far away and returned us as changed people. Thank you. Thank you all so much, and may the Force be with you. Always. And with that, I come to an end of my ranking of the Star Wars saga. Agree with anything I said? Disagree with all of it? Let loose and rip away in the comments below right now. And don't forget to hit that like button, it does a great deal in getting my videos out there. If you're a first time viewer of my channel and you've liked what you've seen, you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, don't be afraid to hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen right now. To all my regular viewers, thank you once again for joining me, and to absolutely everyone, I hope I'll see you again soon. Until next time though guys, take care, and I hope you have a wonderful day.